Good morning or good afternoon. Today we'll be watching a video on Quizzette 803. As always, please make sure you write your last name, comma, first name. Today's date is actually September 3rd. And make sure you're writing this down neatly, nicely, and orderly. And the class color, I'm just going to say I'm red today. Now, number one is always going to present you a rational or an irrational number. And it's going to ask you to convert the fraction into a decimal. And then it's also going to ask you to figure out if that number is rational or irrational. If you don't know the definition of rational or irrational, we're going to write it just very quickly. I'm going to write it very small so that everything else fits. So rational, the first 5 letters of rational is ratio. And if you remember anything from last year, a ratio is a number that, or two quantities that you can express as a fraction. So in English, please, I know you're asking for that. Rational just means that you can turn the number into a fraction. That you can turn it into a fraction. Now, an irrational number is a number that can't be a fraction or a non-repeating and non-terminating. Sorry, I paused it real quick. So an irrational number, it can't be a fraction, or it can't be like a non-repeating, non-terminating decimal. So I'll give you an example. If you think of the value of pi, you probably worked with pi last year. If you didn't work with pi, pi is not just like apple pie. It's a value in math, and it's 3.14. It actually goes on forever. It never terminates, and there's no pattern. So pi would be considered irrational. Whereas a rational number could be anything like 1/2. It could be 5/11, so on and so forth. Now, these questions are obviously, it's probably always going to be rational because I'm giving you a fraction to begin with. But I want you to realize that they're not irrational, meaning there's going to be a pattern to this decimal if you did it right, or it's going to end at some point. We are going to continue to explain this, so don't feel like you have to memorize this right now. Let's get back to number one. It says, what is the decimal equivalent to 80/32? So something I did not realize until I want to say 3 years ago. I have a lot of math nerd friends that I have on Facebook and Instagram, and they post a lot of math jokes and memes. I know it sounds so stupid, but I enjoy it very much. So one of the memes was, I never knew that the division symbol, the dots in the division symbol, represented numbers. So I'll repeat. There was a meme. Not a meme, but I don't even know what else you call it, but I guess it was a meme. I never knew that the division symbol dots represented numbers. So if instead of putting the dots, let's say I put numbers, please excuse that emergency going on in the background. You'll probably hear it in the video. It's fine. Okay, now, so these dots represent numbers. So if I look here, 80 is the numerator and 32 is the denominator. This is division, okay? So you would divide 80 divided by 32. Do not write this, but I want you to see this. A lot of kids don't write this. See this? Don't write this. Don't write the purple. And they think that the decimal is this, 80.32 or 32.80. So they get this number and they just put a decimal between it and call it a day. You have to remember that the division symbol represents numbers. And if you put numbers there, that looks like what type of thing in math? It looks like a fraction. So fractions involve division. Division involves fractions. Fractions are division. Division involves fractions. Every time you see a fraction, there's going to be some type of division involved, always. Never just assume that that this line represents a decimal. That line represents division. So 80 divided by 32. 80 divided by 32. 32 goes into 80 2 times. 32 times 2 is actually 64. 80 minus 64 is 16. Now we can put the decimal. Now you can write the purple, I guess. So that was wrong. I hope you didn't write that. Now 32 goes into 160. That's going to be a little tough, so let's just multiply it on the side. Let's see, 32, I'm going to guess 6 times. 2 times 6 is 12, 18, 19. Oh, that's way too much. Hey, what about 5? 32 times 5, that's going to be 10, 15, 16. Yay, it's this one. So 2.5, because that's 160. Now, if you didn't get 0 at the bottom, you would continue to go all the way to the thousands place, or the third digit. So right here, your decimal equivalent. So 80 over 32 equals 2.5. Make sure you box this. I know there's a lot of writing there. Number 2. A square playing field has an area of 1,255 square yards. About how long is each side of the field? So here, I'm going to repeat the SMPs throughout the year, so you'll get used to it. But one of the standards for mathematical practice is model with mathematics, which is SMP number 4, model with math. A way to approach a problem is to just draw a picture, model with your math. So I always draw a picture when I'm giving a word problem because it just makes it a little bearable. So it says a square playing field has an area of 1,255 square yards. So I'm going to draw a square over here. And I'm going to draw it in green because it's a playing field, so I'm going to pretend it's grass. Now, my square isn't that pretty, but whatever. We're going to pretend that it is. So there's my square. Oh, my gosh, that's terrible. I'm going to see if I can draw one with the tool over here. Let me see. What? Never mind. I tried doing it, but it'll probably vanish from your screen. You probably don't even know what I just did. I'm going to try drawing a square one more time. Better. And it says that the area, so the inside is 1,255. Now, if you remember the characteristics of a square, first of all, it's just asking you what the side length is. So it's asking you what the side lengths are. Now, if you remember the characteristics of a square, let's say I'm doing a smaller example. Let's say I have a square that looks like a rectangle, but we're going to pretend it's a square, of 16. If it's truly a square, the sides have to all equal the same. So the area would be 4 times 4, which is 16. Now here, we have to try to figure out what number times itself is 1,255. This is also known as a square root. So we're looking for the square root of 1,255. So I have to admit something. This one is going to be more of like a guessing game, okay? Think of two numbers. Think of one number that you can multiply by itself that's even close to 1,255. So here's what I'm going to admit to you. One of my favorite multiplication tables is 25 times 25. 25 times 25 is 625. I don't know why. I just really like that multiplication table. So 25 times 25 is 625. So that's what I'm going to start with. So if I'm just thinking, what number times itself is going to get me anywhere close to 1,255? I think I'm going to guess 40. 40 times 40. So on the side, I'm going to do 40 times 40. That's 0, 0, 0, 16, 1,600. That's obviously too much because I'm trying to get 1,255. So think of a number a little less than 40 times itself. I'm going to say 35. 35 times 35. You're just kind of guessing. So go ahead and multiply 35 by 35. Try and go ahead of me to see if you remember how to multiply double digits. I know that might seem like, of course I know how to do that, but you never know. Okay, so 5 times 5 is 25. 3 times 5 is 15, plus 2 is 17. Put a placeholder. 3 times 5 is 15. 3 times 3 is 9. 9 plus 1 is 10. Now you add the integers. 5 plus 0 is 5. That's going to be 12, 2, and 1. 1,225. All right, I have something to admit. This is a typo. It should actually be 1,225, 1,225, 1,225. because it's supposed to work out perfectly. I didn't want to give you guys a funky number right now. So this square root actually equals, what was it? 35 times 35. So that just means that the side lengths here are going to be 35 and 35. So the square root of 1,225 is actually equal to 35. Oops. Don't worry, we're going to learn about this week. So your answer is 35. The side length is 35. Each side of the field is 35. So just write that in a box if you can fit it. Each side of the field is 35 yards. Now be careful with the other number 2s, because if you look at number 2 on Tuesday, it says a square playing field has a side length of 55 yards. What is the area of the field? So this is easier. It's giving you the side length of a square field, and it's asking you what the area is. So remember, the area is just the two sides multiplied together. Thank you. Moving on to number 3. Number 3 is always going to give you, again, a number or a fraction, and it's going to ask you to write it into a decimal. But this time, it's going to ask you to do a mixed number into a decimal. So here we have 5/7/9. So if you remember with mixed numbers, you multiply the whole number. All right, so you multiply the whole number by the denominator, and you add the numerator. So 5 times 9 is 45. 45 plus 7 is 52. And then you keep the same denominator, 9. So you converted your mixed fraction into an improper fraction. So that's the first step, okay? This is the very first thing that you do. The second thing that you do is you remember the division symbol. Remember, fractions mean division. So you have 52. Go ahead and write this out. 52 divided by 9. So in other words, 52 divided by 9. And 9 goes into 52 5 times, which is 45. And then that's 7. And now you start the decimal process. So 9 goes into 70. Okay, so 9 goes into 70. 7 times. Thank you, guys. 7 times. 9 times 7 is 63. Okay, you bring another 0 down. Oh, wait, 70 minus 63 is 7. So now 9 goes into 70 7 times, which is another 63. And if you notice, it's always going to repeat. So you can just put a little line on top. Raise your hand if you've already learned that before. Excellent. So our decimal equivalent to 5/7/9 is actually 5.7. You can put another 7, or you can just put 1 7 and put a line on top. This represents a rational number. It's a rational number because the decimal repeats. It has a pattern, okay? Another characteristic of a rational number is if the decimal ends. So if we would have just gotten 5.12 and that's it zeroes out, that means it's a rational number. If the decimal repeats, has a pattern, that's a rational number. It's when it never repeats or it never ends, that's when it's irrational, okay? So if you divide any of these and there's no pattern, it's going to be irrational. If you have any questions, please raise your hand. Make sure you read number 2 carefully, and good luck on the rest of this Quizette.